Great. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lumiere Symposium and graduation ceremony. We're so excited to have all of you here. We have a remarkable collection of people here, from students themselves, the most important, to mentors, to family, to partners, to guest speakers. So thank you guys so much. My name, if you haven't met yet, is Steven. I am a director of the Lumiere Research Scholar Program, also a PhD student at Harvard University. And I'm really honored to kick us off today. And just so you guys get a little bit of a sense for what we're going to be doing today, we have three main sections. The first section is we're going to hear from a really remarkable leader in higher education and in the world of making change as a leader, Jonathan Fanton. We're then going to go into hear from some of our students in terms of the work that they've done in their own presentations, learning about some of the research that they've done. And finally, we're going to have a bit of a graduation ceremony where we're going to be celebrating the students and their work. And again, congratulations to all of them for going through this program and for completing it. We've seen some, as we'll see throughout the night tonight, some remarkable research that's come out of this, and some great growth in our students. Before I pass off and introduce Jonathan, I just want to say a little bit about why I care about Lumiere and why this is such an important program and institution for me. And it really connects to the experience that my family's had with higher education. I think I've shared this story with many of you, but I think it bears repeating for to get a sense for why Lumiere is in many of the ways it is. So my great grandfather was born in Berlin, Germany. His name is Fritz Kahn. He was born to this physician and author in the late 19th century. He was fascinated by the human body. He was interested in how it worked. He wanted to understand it. And he was really interested in how you can make something that was difficult and complex, like how the body worked, in something that was simple and understandable. And so he went to medical school in Berlin, eventually got his degree and began writing about the human body. He published a number of pieces on the human body, and as infographics, he's actually known today as the father of the modern day infographic. But one of the things that Fritz faced, that many people faced in the 20s and 30s, was that he was Jewish in a time and in a place where being Jewish was quite difficult. Clear persecution that began in the early 30s and then culminated in the Holocaust. So he, sensing and realizing that his family and himself was in danger, tried to escape from Germany. He did escape. He actually escaped from Europe with the help of his friend Albert Einstein, who wrote a letter for him on his behalf. But while he left unscathed, and while he brought along many of the things that he had beforehand, not physically, they lost everything physically, but many of his intellectual assets, some of the things that you never lose when you have a great education. His son, who was my grandfather, didn't have that opportunity. He left, my grandfather left when he was about 17, never got the opportunity to study college, eventually emigrated to the United States. And for my dad, and it's funny to talk about for my grandfather's stories at the exact same age as many of these students who have completed this program, who are off to, and I've spoken with all of them, remarkable futures. I think that was the feeling of my grandfather, but then that was kind of taken away from him. He ended up moving between working class jobs in the United States, settling in Hawaii, where my dad grew up, very poor. My dad picked pineapples to pay throughout junior high and high school. And again, when my dad was about your old age, the students here today, he found out his dad passed away. And so my dad was a terrible student. I mean, my dad would never do a research scholar program. Let's be clear about that. He took 4 PE classes in his senior year of high school. So if you want to talk about your IB curriculum or your APs or whatever it is, compare that to my dad, a big difference. But when he found out his dad passed away, he decided that he wanted to do something kind of in honor of his dad. And one of the things that he decided to do was to try out research. His dad had always loved research. His dad had always wanted to be like his father, who had been this famous researcher and writer. And so my dad started working in a psych lab, absolutely fell in love with it, and really changed his own life. Eventually went on to do a PhD, became a professor, And you know, my life is very different. I had a very cushy psychology professor as a dad, so a very different story than that of my dad. But the power of research continued to be a core one, and the power of mentorship continued to be core in my life. In fact, Duva and I met, our other director, met when we were both in a mentorship research program at Harvard College at the business school, and that's where I am right now, doing my PhD. And so, you know, as I look at you guys today, I'm so impressed with what you've done, and I'm so inspired by what we are working to achieve. All of the mentors, all the students, all of our team, in making these types of research and mentorship opportunities available for students around the world. So that's just one thing, and it's really special for me to say that, because I'm joined here by one of the most important mentors in my life, Jonathan Fanton. So I'll just say a little bit on Jonathan, because this man has done so much in his life. And I mean, I think I could list out, let me just say some brief things. He'll talk a bit about what he's done. He is most recently the president of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, previously the president of the MacArthur Foundation, the president of the New School, chair board of the Human Rights Watch, you know, many accolades, a career that the envy of I'm sure many people around the world, many of his peers. But I think the thing that is most important about Jonathan is that, and one thing that I've experienced is that he, throughout his life, and particularly I've seen the past years, is someone who's always given back to others as a mentor. I mean, I met Jonathan because I reached out to him as a kind of snot-nosed college student, and he responded to my request to come have dinner with him and a few other students, a few other undergrads. I thought he would never reply. He took the time, and he not only became a mentor to me, he became a mentor to that entire group. And a number of people in that group still call him on a regular basis to get his advice, to learn from him, and to learn his lessons. And so, Jonathan, it's really an honor to have you here, because you've been such an important impact in my life. But I know that you've also had a massive impact on the world broadly. So, Jonathan, I'll pass to you. But before actually I do that, I would love it if the students could quickly open up their videos and introduce themselves. So I will, and just if you could just say where you are, what your name is, and broadly your research. So maybe Misha, you could start. Sorry for calling you out.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Nisha. I'm in Mumbai, India, and I'm doing research on the productivity of high school students.
Awesome. Asta, would you like to go?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Astha Bagri. I'm living in Calcutta, India, and my research was actually on isotopic analysis.
Great. And Niharika?
Hi, I'm Niharika, and I live in Bangalore, India, and my research topic is related to how wildlife conservation can promote rural development in India.
Excellent. Arhan?
Hi, I'm Arhan. I live in Mumbai, and my research question was related to carbon dioxide emissions of cars.
Great. Avni, would you like to go?
Hi, I'm Avni. I'm in Mumbai, India, and my research was on urban disaster management, in specific the inclusion of informal workers in disaster management in Mumbai.
Great. And Lynn, would you like to go?
Hi, my name is Ling. I live in Vietnam, and I research about Hong Kong protests.
Excellent. And am I missing everyone? I don't think so. Okay, perfect. I will pause right there. Jonathan, I would love to pass to you. And again, a big thank you for joining us tonight. I know that you have a very busy schedule, so it's an honor for us to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Can you hear me okay? Good. Well, thanks for inviting me to have a conversation with the Lumiere Research Scholars on this wonderful occasion, graduation occasion. In reading up on the background of the program, I was moved, Stephen, by your opening statement and I quote, that critical reasoning, determination, and innovative thinking, all traits trained while doing research, are critical to success in this century. I think that's true, and I think you're an example of all those traits that you've developed, and you certainly are a great leader. So I look forward to hearing about the Scholars Research topics in our discussion. I'll be able to stay on for a little bit, not all, but I want to hear a few. I'm intrigued by the titles: Researching Urban Disaster Management, Barriers Women Face in the Corporate World, the Role of Hong Kong Protests in Inspiring New Kinds of Social Movements, the question, can wildlife conservation promote rural development in India? These are all good examples drawn from a longer, fascinating list of topics. So I'm very, very impressed with the topics that you've taken on. A little bit about my background, and then let me give you some examples of some research that I've supported that has had an immediate effect, or not so immediate, sometimes long-term effect on public policy. A bit about me. I talk to you from my house in Fairfield, Connecticut, outside of New York, where my family came in 1680. So we've been in the same place a long time. My family were farmers until my grandfather went to Yale and became an engineer working with Thomas Edison. My father went to Yale and became a lawyer. I went to Yale and almost became a lawyer, but on reflection, I stayed at Yale and got a PhD in American history. While I was studying for my PhD, I got asked to be the chief of staff for the president of Yale at a very young age. And that persuaded me that I really liked teaching and I really liked university administration. So I decided I would really forever give up the law school idea and really concentrate on completing my PhD. When I did, I moved to the University of Chicago as vice president for planning. And then, as you heard, on to the New School for Social Research in New York, where I was a president for 17 years. And the New School had an important moment in history in the 1930s when it rescued Jewish intellectuals from Germany and the rest of Europe and started a university in exile. I returned to Chicago after the New School, and for 10 years was president of the MacArthur Foundation. You may know of it because it gives out the famous Genius Awards, but it does a lot more than that. It gives out over $200 million a year in fields that I really care about: community development, affordable rental housing, preservation, juvenile justice in the US and overseas, with offices in Mexico, Nigeria, India, and Russia. We do human rights, peace and security, biodiversity conservation, and women's health. So $200 million a year is a lot of fun to be able to give out. Then I went on to, as Stephen said, to be president of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, where I've just retired. That's one of the oldest scholarly academies in the country, having been founded by John Adams and John Hancock and others in 1780. And in the words of its charter, its mission is to cultivate every art and science which may tend to advance the interest, honor, dignity, and happiness of a free, independent, and virtuous people. Well, that's what we've been doing. We have 6,000 domestic members, 600 international honorary members, and they cover all scholarly fields, but not just scholars. We've got lawyers, businessmen, political leaders, military leaders, arts, NGO leaders. It's really good people, smart people, people of real values who want to make the world a better place through research. And I think this is the key to our conversation. So the Academy's work is done through commissions, groups of its members and other experts that get together to study an issue. So for example, we had a recent commission looking at the role of the humanities. We have another commission underway right now looking at the importance of the arts. We had a commission on the need for more investment in basic scientific research. Another commission on how to strengthen citizenship in a democracy, a really important topic in the US these days, but also elsewhere in the world. And we've had a long-standing interest in international affairs, and especially in securing international agreements to keep the world safe from nuclear catastrophe. And our work often makes a difference. For example, our Citizenship Commission had a series of recommendations, one of which was to have term limits on members of the US Supreme Court. If you've been following the controversy now, after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you'll know that there's a lot of worry about stacking the court with conservatives, younger people who will serve for 50 years. And so there now has been a bill introduced into the US Senate based on our report recommending term limits for US Supreme Court justices. Another issue we've really cared a lot about was getting more investment into basic scientific research. And one of our recommendations from our commission, which was to give a tax credit for investment in basic research, for private investment in basic research, has become law. So those are just two examples of out of many I could cite of where the research the Academy has done is making a difference. But let me come and talk a little bit about my work at MacArthur, because a theme of my work in MacArthur, which is a private foundation governed by a board of directors, but with complete freedom to pick its topics and to give money to anywhere in the world that it chooses to invest in. And I had a passion for supporting research that could make a difference in public policy. And I was heavily influenced, not by something MacArthur did, but by a study that I read called the Perry Preschool Study, which was conducted by an economist named Edward Gramlich, maybe 40 years ago. At that time, there was real skepticism about using federal tax dollars to support early childhood education, preschool education. People didn't think that was a good use of federal money. So Gramlich did a longitudinal study. He picked a group of students at a school called the Perry Elementary School that had a preschool program. And he studied them along with a comparable group of students in another school that did not have a preschool program. And he studied these two groups of students for maybe 20 years. He followed them through college, through early adulthood, into their early careers. And he found that the students who had gone to the Perry School with the preschool were more likely to graduate from high school, were more likely to go to college and finish college. They got better jobs, they paid more taxes, they were less likely to commit crimes. And he calculated for that every federal public dollar invested in a preschool program, there was $16 returned to the public benefit. And by people paying more taxes, by not going to jail, and all the rest. So that study gave strong support for expanding federal funding for preschool, which is now pretty widespread in the United States. And it led me to an insight about MacArthur's work in fields like housing, conservation, and juvenile justice. We need to do a cost-benefit analysis so we could gain support for our programs, not only based on the values argument, often thought of as liberal, but based on hard evidence that doing the right thing for a person in need or a person in trouble was good for society as a whole. And so I began to apply that insight to MacArthur's work. For example, MacArthur had a terrific program promoting juvenile justice for young people, and having juvenile justice programs with redemptive options, with counseling, rather than trying these young people as adults and putting them in adult prisons. Juvenile justice programs emphasized redemptive options like work opportunities and counseling, rather than jail time with convicted adult criminals. We followed young people who ran afoul of the law in 2 states, one that had a juvenile justice system and the other that treated them like adults and through regular courts and put them in jail. And we followed these 2 cohorts of young people over many years, and guess what? Those who went into a juvenile justice system were 50% less likely to commit new crimes. Whereas 85% or 80% of those kids who've been put in adult jails, 80% of them committed another crime and went to jail. And so if you had a juvenile justice system with redemptive options, the public is safer, young people develop and contribute to the economy, and the public doesn't have to pay for expensive jail time. And so based on the evidence from our research, the juvenile justice system is being adopted by more and more states. We also did another scientific study to try to determine at what age the average young person thinks like an adult and can be held responsible for their actions. Previously, it was thought, well, by 15 or 16, kids are really adults, and if they do something wrong, they should have known better. Let's put them in jail. No, it turns out that our study showed that 18 is the year where the average person has enough reasoning power and experience to know the consequences of their action. And that study was cited in a Supreme Court decision, Roper v. Simmons, that outlawed the death penalty for people under 18, for youth. And so there's a good example of research paying off. So I offer these examples as solid evidence that the work you do can influence policy. And so I encourage you to pursue your research with the ambition of making a difference in public policy. The skills you learn as Lumiere scholars will equip you to lead in government service, business, nonprofit organizations, the military, education, and more. And this is going to be a better world for the research you do and the research that you not just sit on a shelf, but get it applied in public policy. And you'll also be a better citizen. You'll know more. You'll be more thoughtful in casting your vote, and you'll make better choices in your own personal lives. So I'm a big fan of this program, and I will encourage Stephen to give you my contact information and invite you to be in touch with me whenever I can be helpful to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, thank you. I will clap as well. There we go. Thank you. I know we have a few questions. I think we probably have time for around 2, from the students. So if any of the students have a question that they would like to ask, maybe you could just unmute yourself and directly ask it.
I wanted to ask that we're in a world which is constantly changing. So is there any specific change in, say, the scientific world which has actually appealed to you?
Well, I'm an historian, not a scientist, but I've supported a lot of scientific research. And I am, very supportive of math and science education at an early age, for sure, but also continuing up through college. At Yale, there was a very light science requirement, and I really regret, one of my great regrets in life, is not taking more science.
Hi, I also had a question. So the world appears to be growing increasingly polarized, and many countries seem to be electing right-wing populist leaders into office. So how do you think these rising tensions, perhaps exemplified by the pandemic, would affect future climate policies and like the climate rhetoric in the future?
Well, at the New School, where I used to be president, we, in the 1980s, had a seminar, underground seminar, all through the Iron Curtain countries, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. And we were looking at working with human rights activists about how to promote democracy in those countries. And of course, things changed in 89 and 90, and these countries opened up. But now look at what's going on in Poland. Look at what's going on in Hungary. It's very disappointing. And so we have another seminar that we've started all these years later called Democracy 2.0, and we're asking just this question. And so I urge you to go, it's just started, but we've got people from, not just from Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, but we have other countries, Turkey, for instance, is part of it. India is a part of it. I think we're going to add Belarus, and so it's going to end some in South America. And you can go on the New School website, and it's under Democracy 2.0, and there's also a series of publications called the Public Seminar, and you'll see some of the best thinking that's going on this topic. But long story short, I do think, as an historian, we go in cycles. And I think we're in a precarious cycle now, but I don't think the outcome is determined. And I know I shouldn't be political, but I really think the United States has played an important role over the years as a beacon of democracy. And this election we're about to have here is going to be very important. And if we make a change, of course, as I hope we will, let us hope that that will send a signal. But I also think that we're learning here and elsewhere that local action really matters. And we've been so focused on a bad guy in government in the capital, we forget that democracy is very local. And what's really interesting about the Navalny situation in Russia is that what he was doing was working at the local level and way away from Moscow on local elections to begin to get in city councils opposition figures to the ruling party. And it was working, which is why they went after him. But I really do think it matters to get engaged where you live in mayor's races, local council races, whatever the governance is. And that's how we're going to push this back, and especially important for your generation to get engaged.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Naharka, I just saw you quickly unmute.
Oh yeah, I just, like you just said, there's a lot the future generation can do for research in public policy in particular. Is there any particular cause that you worked with that you think requires more work or further research, just things that can be carried forward in this generation?
Well, I think, can you hear me okay? Not frozen, I hope. I think virtually, all the things I mentioned MacArthur is doing is deserving of more work. I happen to have a passion for human rights. As you saw, I was chairman of Human Rights Watch. I've also been chairman of Scholars at Risk that rescues endangered scholars. So I'm very keen on developing a better academic freedom index. And so we're not just looking at a single high-profile scholar that gets harassed or jailed or fired, but that we develop a kind of index and we can compare countries against other countries, but also against their own past history to see how well they're doing in protecting academic freedom.
I have a question related to academic freedom. So do you think there are any downsides to absolute academic freedom? And if there are, then how would you deal with them? How do you suggest we deal with them?
You broke up a little bit. Is there a downside to absolute academic freedom, did you say?
Yeah. Any downsides to absolute academic freedom?
I would say this. I think it's important to have all points of view expressed. So I'm not in favor of political correctness. I'm not in favor of whether it's from the left or from the right, exposing students to only one point of view. I'm very much in favor of, as a president of a university, working hard to have a diverse set of speakers and some diversity on the faculty, and being sure that controversial speakers were able to speak. And I had a lot of experience with that at Yale and the new school. But I do think it's important to have some ground rules that are, sophisticated and sensitive. For example, at the new school, we passed a policy on discriminatory harassment. And so we said, we're a place that from the beginning had really stood for academic freedom, but there have to be some boundaries. And so if something that is said contains threatening or fighting words, and if it's directed at a particular person, and if it's done so with the intent of doing harm, we're not going to have that. So I'm happy to say that in all the years I was at the new school, having put out this discriminatory harassment policy, we never had a case of it. But I do think it had the benefit of educating the community that they should think carefully about what they say. Not about saying something that's kind of theoretical and controversial, but saying something that might be hurtful to another student or a faculty member. And so that's not a limit exactly, but it's a consideration.
Excellent. Hey, Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us here today. I know it is, you're someone, as I mentioned before, who's changed my life as someone not only who's given great advice, but just serves as an example of how to live a meaningful and purposeful life. So a big thank you from me and a big thank you from the whole Lumiere family for you to be here.
Thank you. And I hope to hear from the students and want to follow what their course is. And I'll stay on for a little bit. I have another appointment, but I'd like to hear a few of the presentations if I may, and I'll just drop off quietly when the time comes. But please be in touch. I love your questions, very thoughtful questions, and I hope I didn't talk too fast, by the way. I hope you were able to comprehend what I was saying. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'll pass to Dhruva for the remainder.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the graduation ceremony and the symposium. My name is Dhruva, and I'm one of the other directors of Lumiere, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you. So a bit of background for myself. I'm currently a PhD student at Oxford studying international development, and I also have the honor of serving as a mentor this last cohort to one of the students who's about to present, Niharika. Before we move into the student presentations, I'd like to continue on the theme of gratitude that we've begun and thank Dr. Fanton for those wonderful words and those thought-provoking answers to the questions, but also thank a few other people in the audience here who have made this program possible. So a quick thanks, first of all, to Nishita, Austin, Arsha, and Eric. These are core members of the Lumiere team. Austin was the program manager over the last cohort. Arsha worked with us as an intern, and Eric was our writing coach, and all of them played an incredibly important role in the work that these students have done. Second, a big thank you to our partners, Spark Prep, and the Red Pen. I see both of you here in the audience, so thank you for making it and for supporting us all along the journey. And finally, a huge thank you to the mentors who work with these students and help them along the way. So I see Danny and Aurelia in the audience, and if I missed anyone else, I'm really sorry, but thank you to all of you. And finally, a big thank you to the students and parents. Without you guys, this program would not have happened, and the students would not have had this opportunity that they did. So thank you so much for supporting them and for working so hard over the course of the last 10 weeks. A little bit about the Lumiere Research Program before we launch into the student presentation. So over the last 3 months, 10 to 12 weeks, these students have worked on an independent research paper. They first applied to the program, they submitted a written application, and then did they had an interview after that, and after making it through this competitive process, they were matched one-on-one with their mentors. In their first meeting, the mentor and the student first got to know each other, understood the student's background and their level of experience, and the mentor then put together a personalized syllabus for the student on the basis of that. They then spent the next few weeks exploring their topic, and then the final 5 to 6 weeks of the program really working on that 20-page research paper and putting it together. So what you see over the next 20 minutes of student presentations is honestly incredible hard work on the basis of both the mentors and the students, and I'm so excited for them. Now I'm going to hand over to Nishita, our current program manager, to introduce the student workshops, student presentations, and kick them off. Thanks, Nishita.
Thank you so much, Dhruva. And okay, so we have 5 presentations today, and the first one is going to be by Niharika. She's from Bangalore, and her mentor is Dhruva Bhatt, our very own. So we're really excited to hear you, Niharika. Dhruva will be sharing the screen. Yeah, on to you, Niharika.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for this opportunity. This program has honestly been one of the best experiences, and I'm so grateful. Yeah, so my is Can Wildlife Conservation Promote Rural Development in India? Can you go to the next slide, please?
Yep.
Yeah. So I first asked for something I've always been really interested in, and that's wildlife conservation. So wildlife in India has been seen as a symbol of its, have even been considered deities. The second aspect is rural development, and as a developing country, I think that is a parameter that should be taken into consideration in any government measure or policy. It is widely believed that humans and tigers cannot coexist, and there's an ongoing debate regarding whether wildlife conservation is rural welfare. On one hand, agricultural expansion takes place resources, and on the other, wildlife leads to crop damage of rural communities. So they've always had a conflicting relationship, and I thought addressing this issue was very important. Next slide, please. An analysis I used to conduct the study section, where I collected data regarding the occupational structure of rural communities, as well as the wages of them from various occupations. I found that, and the paper analyzes different methods of how wildlife conservation can be achieved while promoting rural development subject to the Indian context. In cases where this is not possible, it highlights ways in which conservation can be accomplished without harming rural communities. I also used the case study of Jim Corbett National Park, that is the oldest national park in the country, And that was used to examine whether the arguments made and the solutions suggested were actually applicable in India and whether they could be salary if a park employee was over 25,000 rupees per year, whereas that of an agricultural laborer in Uttarakhand was less than 5,000 rupees per month. Next slide, please.
Niharika, we're getting the audio, it keeps cutting out. Do you think maybe you want to go off video and try with just audio for the next slide? Yeah.
Is this better? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Like I said, my case study was used to examine whether the arguments made can be practically applied in rural communities in India. And can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so one of the major ways in which through the case study, I found that one of the major ways in which wildlife conservation can promote rural development is providing employment to each year. And wildlife conservation can promote rural development when efforts are made to compensate, rehabilitate, or employ rural communities whose livelihood has been adversely impacted by national parks, sanctuaries, or reserves. Several forest communities are actually displaced when national parks or other conservation efforts are constructed. So when they're rehabilitated or compensated for their loss, then they maintain a positive attitude to wildlife conservation. And funds collected by the government from the conservation properly utilized and participation of rural residents should be encouraged. This is tax that's imposed on all hotels and resorts within a 5-kilometer radius of national parks. And these funds collected are supposed to be utilized towards the management of national parks as well as local livelihood development. Now, since this is largely a bureaucratic measure, it's open to corruption and other malpractices. But this measure also includes representatives from rural communities to ensure that this problem will be minimized, and hopefully this effort will bear good results for rural future. And wildlife conservation can be achieved without hindering rural development when national parks work hand in hand with non-government organizations, compensation to affected rural sections. These work better than government compensation schemes because very often compensation for things like crop loss and livestock depredation, which rural communities really suffer from, takes up to a year or even 2. Whereas in cases of national parks, compensation is often received within a day or even a week. Therefore, I think the role NGOs play in ensuring that wildlife conservation promotes rural development is very significant. Act as barriers between human and wildlife, and in recent times, due to agricultural and industrial activities, they've kind of been minimized, and the trees and forest areas, these reserves, and while agricultural development and industrialization may seem like it increases interactions between humans and wildlife. And I'm sorry, did I break off again?
Niharika, you just broke up for the last couple of sentences.
Oh, okay, yeah. Is it better now?
Yeah, this seems better.
Yeah, so as I said, due to agricultural practices and industrialization, a lot of forest is being lost. And while agricultural and industrialization may seem like a positive indicator of rural development, in the long run, it only increases chances of interaction between the two. So preserving them would make a very big difference in the long run and ensuring that wildlife conservation and rural development can be achieved simultaneously.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Niharika.
And sorry if I broke off.
No, we understand all our network issues, so it's fine. Next up, we have Misha, who's from Bombay, and her mentor was Han. On to you, Misha.
Yeah, thank you, Nishchita. So I researched in the field of behavioral economics. Also, yeah, before I start, I'd just like to thank everybody at Lumiere for giving me this opportunity, especially Han, who has been my mentor for these past 8 weeks. It was a great experience. So my research question was, to what extent are soft commitment devices effective in improving the productivity of high school students? I did an experimental paper, and since because of the current situation and time constraints, I didn't actually carry out the experiment yet. I plan to in the future. So I'll just be sharing with you my experimental design. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of a background. So humans are generally irrational decision makers. We make most of our decisions based off of intuition rather than through deliberate thinking. And one way in which this irrationality manifests is in our time inconsistent preferences. So what this means is that our preferences differ for different points in time. So I'll give you an example. So if I were to ask you, do you want $100 today or $105 tomorrow? You would probably say $100 a day. But if I were to ask you, you want $100 365 days from now, or $105 366 days from now, you would probably take the latter. So this shows how we have a present bias and how we value instant gratification over long-term satisfaction. And this also creates the problem of procrastination. And the reason why I focused on high school students in particular is because I think this is where the problem of procrastination starts, because students are given more freedom to make choices. They have responsibility for education. And because of that, they can make bad choices and carry out procrastination. So over 50% of high school students are frequent procrastinators, and 80% of them regret procrastinating afterwards. So this shows that it's a problem for them. It causes anxiety, sleep deprivation, and depression, and can affect the success in the future. So we need a solution for this problem, and commitment devices are one such solution. So commitment devices are techniques that are voluntarily taken up by people, and they can be rewards or punishments or something that restricts your choices until you achieve your goal. So there can be hard commitment and soft commitment. Hard commitment would involve monetary punishment, for example, if you don't complete a goal in or don't meet a deadline. Whereas soft commitment is more implicit. It has psychological costs, and that's what I chose to explore because I think it will be more feasible for high school students. And in soft commitment, I chose to explore how committing to a person by sharing your goals with them or declaring your goals to them and later following up and telling them whether you completed these goals or not, how that commitment to a person will improve your productivity. So I think that the relationship you have with that person is important to explore. So whether they're an authority figure to you or a peer versus a peer, or whether there's someone who's familiar to you versus someone who's a stranger. So I think authority is especially important because humans are innately obedient creatures. And I think that getting to an authority figure would be very effective. And familiarity also, committing to a stranger versus committing to a friend, they would have different expectations of you, and maybe that could affect productivity. Next slide, please. So what I did to explore this is I did a lab I plan to do a lab experiment, and my sample will be high school students from 6 schools in Mumbai. I've taken 6 schools because I want my results to be representative. Mumbai is very diverse with various socioeconomic classes. So if I want my results to be generalizable to Mumbai, I think having various schools of different backgrounds is important. There will be 2 lab sessions of 2 hours each, and they will be a week apart. I plan to have tasks both in English and math. There will be multiple choice questions, and it'll be computerized. And since it's a lab experiment, I need to introduce certain elements so that it will be externally valid. So in reality, students have there are a lot of distractions, like the internet, for example. So in this lab experiment, I'll be allowing them access to the internet so that they can procrastinate, and we can see which treatment will cause them to procrastinate less. So I'll measure productivity using input and output, input being the time taken for a task and the output being the number of correct answers. Yeah, so can you go to the next slide, please? So I have 4 treatments and a control group. So in each treatment, the student will commit to a different type of person. So the relationship to the person they're committing to will be different for each treatment. The first treatment, the students will commit to a familiar peer. Second is unfamiliar peer. Third is a familiar authority figure. And fourth, unfamiliar authority figure. And the control group, in the control group, they'll not commit to anyone. Yeah, so I'll be seeing how productivity differs for all of these treatments. So that's my experimental design. And I plan to do a pilot study before I actually carry out the experiment to see what sample size I'll need and to smooth over any details. Yeah, next slide, please. So,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Nisha.
Yeah.
That was such an interesting paper.
Yeah.
Now we have Arhan. He's from Bombay and his mentor is Santiago Romero. So Arhan, on to you.
Hi. First, I'd just like to thank Dr. Santiago, without whom my research would probably not have been possible. So my question was, what factors affect carbon dioxide emissions of cars and how? So can you move? So we all know of the negative effects of carbon dioxide. It contributes to the greenhouse effect, leads to global warming, and adversely affects our lives through acid rain and various health problems. So carbon dioxide emissions have been rising relentlessly over the last few years. In 2018, almost 37 gigatons of carbon dioxide were emitted, which is almost double the amount emitted in 1970. Now, there are various industries that contribute to carbon dioxide emissions. One of these industries is the automotive industry. So around 17% of global carbon dioxide emissions are caused by road vehicles such as cars, trucks, and buses. And the total number of cars, trucks, and buses was around 1.3 billion in 2016. So if we better understand the factors that affect carbon dioxide emissions of cars, we can design them in the future so that they emit less. Next, please. So in order to conduct our research, we downloaded a data set from the European Environmental Agency, which contained carbon dioxide emissions and lots of other information such as mass, engine capacity, fuel type, power output, wheelbase, and manufacturer, among others, of all the cars sold in the European Union from 2010 to 2015. We then put this data into Python and analyzed it. We first got some basic information, and then we plotted a few graphs of the predictors we used against carbon dioxide emissions. We then built 2 models in order to predict carbon dioxide emissions from 3 variables, which were mass, power output, and engine capacity. So the first model was a linear model, which is basically that the program tries to find you an equation which will give you carbon dioxide emissions given these 3 variables, mass, power output, and engine capacity. Then we also built another type of predictive model, a tree-based model or a gradient boosting model, which is a lot more flexible than a tree-based model, and it results in higher predictive efficiency, and it also gives us information that tells us which factor is most important in determining the emissions of a car. So we can proceed. So as we see from the 3 graphs at the top and the one on the left, there is a positive relationship between all the 3 variables and carbon dioxide emissions. So as these 3 variables rise, so will carbon dioxide emissions. Another interesting finding we got was that diesel cars would emit less than similarly sized petrol cars, but some more research told us that replacing petrol with diesels would not really be a viable solution, as petrol cars don't really emit much of nitrogen oxides, but diesel cars emit a lot more nitrogen oxides. So they have their own disadvantages. And from the tree-based model or the gradient boosting model, we found this fourth bar graph, which tells us that engine capacity was the most important variable in predicting carbon dioxide emissions, followed by mass, power, and fuel type. So that clearly tells us that if we want to reduce emissions from cars in the future, reducing the engine size is the way to go. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Arhan. That was such a need of the hour kind of a study. What we'll do right now is take a 2-minute break. So all of you can just quickly refresh, spread your legs, stretch your legs, and get some water to drink or something. So see you back in 2 minutes. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is back. We'll get started on the next presentation, and the next one is by Asta. Asta is from Kolkata, and her mentor is Danielle. So on to you, Asta.
Hi, everyone. So I'd like to start with a little background on how it all started. So at the beginning, during our week 0 meeting, Danielle and I realized that our interests are somewhat different, but we found our middle ground, and that was the isotopic analysis of meteoroids. So essentially, what happened was that I was going through some of the papers Danielle had sent me about isotopes. And upon reading them, I realized that the isotopic analysis for heavy elements is thoroughly under-researched. So what essentially are isotopic signatures? So isotopic signatures are kind of like fingerprints, and they can be used to trace back chemical reactions. Now you can apply the same concept on meteoroids. So a word which is commonly heard. So meteoroids are these extraterrestrial rocky substances, which are deposits of which are found all around Earth, and researchers collect these deposits to understand how the isotopes of different elements, how they vary in these meteoroids. So while going through the papers, I actually found that there is a debate about the uranium isotopic ratio in certain meteoroids called chondrite meteoroids. Now, these chondrite meteoroids are the meteoroids which had actually formed right at the beginning of the solar system, and because of which they can be used to accurately determine the age of the solar system. So I decided to explore, the work of these three conflicting parties who were providing results which were not really matching with each other. Now, since we're all stuck at home, the method which I adopted was an in-depth analysis of the three works. So I analyzed the validity of the mathematical equations, the preciseness and accuracy of the instruments that they used, the assumptions which they made, the approximations and the error bars, error margins which they used, and also their graphical representations. And my aim essentially was to determine which work has the highest probability of being proven as true if future studies are conducted on this topic. So basically what happened when I actually went through these is that this, as you can see from this graph, there is a particular time interval called the free decay interval. And I won't go into much depth of what it is, but I can say that it's directly related to the age of the solar system. So it's used to actually determine the age of the solar system. And as you can see, these three papers by Tissot et al., Brenecka et al., and Sterling et al., this value of free decay interval is highly variable. And obviously such large differences in time period in million years is a huge controversy. So now when I actually went through their work, I realized that the work of Brenecka et al. Is the most promising. And the reason behind this was actually the way they conducted their study. So they actually took into consideration all sorts of error margins. Their preparation of the meteoroids was actually very precise. Like they did a average of both the bulk meteoroids as well as smaller samples. So I found out that there are uranium isotopic variations do exist in these meteoroids, in these chondrite meteoroids, and they can only be attributed to curium decay. So curium is another heavy element which decays into uranium. And based on my findings, I realized that the chance of Brenecka et al.'s work being proven as true in the future was actually the highest. I would like to conclude by saying that Lumiere has actually given me the chance to understand what scientific research is about. So now when I read any paper, I won't just superficially go over it. I'll even look at the most insignificant of elements, and because I know that they are pivotal to the findings of any work. And finally, I would like to thank my mentor, Danielle. She's actually guided me in ways I didn't imagine. She's given me an insight into what undergrad and grad research is like. And since I am looking forward to pursue research in astrophysics, I know that this project has actually bolstered my confidence in many ways. And now I look forward to being a part of this world even in the future. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Asta. I think I understood so much about this study because of you right now. So thank you. The last presentation for today is by Avni, and her mentor is Haley, and she's from Bombay. So on to you, Avni.
Hi, so I think Nishita just introduced me, and I'm Avni, I'm from Mumbai, and my mentor was Haley. And the research topic that I went for was rethinking urban disaster management, and in specific, a case study of Mumbai's inclusion of informal workers. And my research question was to what extent the urban disaster management plan for Mumbai includes informal workers. So I think right off the bat, I knew that I wanted to research something that was around sustainable urbanism, climate change, and disaster management. And over the past few weeks, Haley introduced me to a lot of interesting research papers, and we ended up narrowing it down to this topic, which I think is really pertinent, especially for policy planning moving forward. Yeah, could you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so why have I chosen this research question, and what's the context of this question in particular? So I'm going to talk about three things: urban vulnerability, disaster management, and the informal economy. So yeah, so I think no discussion of policies can be complete without a mention of climate change. So climate change is exacerbating both the frequency and intensity of natural disasters. And in that context, the next thing is urban areas and what makes them particularly vulnerable. And it's their systems that it's their specific systems, such as high population density and rapid urbanization, especially in developing countries, that makes urban areas particularly vulnerable. The next important thing is the disproportionate impact of natural disasters. And to quote one of the papers I read, it's an unequally distributed public bad, which means that it disproportionately impacts vulnerable communities, such as informal workers. Now, 61% of the world's employed workers are employed informally, which is around 2 billion people. And they are particularly vulnerable because of the fact that they often lack insurance, they often lack healthcare. There's a significant relation between being poor and coming from a poor household and being informally employed, which brings me to my method for this paper. So yeah, could you move to the next slide? So I did a document analysis of the disaster management plan for the city of Mumbai, which I supplemented with the guidelines for coming up with this disaster management plan. And my analysis was 2 layered. So the first layer was a content analysis, which gave me a broad overview of the paper and its level of inclusion, which I did by counting the number of occurrences of 2 sets of keywords. And the second was a thematic analysis, which involved an in-depth reading of the document, followed by like a critical analysis and questioning the level of inclusion. Yeah, could you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, and finally, the discussion and the findings. So what I found with the rate of occurrence of the key terms was that informal workers were not directly mentioned at any point. They were only mentioned a few times as fishermen or as hawkers, and the phrases informal workers or informal economy weren't mentioned at all in the 500-page document. Then the second point that I would want to bring up is participatory versus inclusive processes. So one of the papers I read while coming up with, while doing this research project was a paper by Quick et al., which distinguished participation and inclusion. And that paper established three key criteria for inclusive practices, which was that they engage multiple ways of knowing, they co-produce content and processes with all stakeholders, and they sustained temporal openness. And with my analysis of the supplementary documents, I found that that the disaster management plan for Mumbai did not meet any of these criteria. Then the third thing I want to discuss is the indirect inclusion and normative statements made in this document. So a lot of this document was really normative, and it made a lot of statements of how planning should be and how the management should be, but at no point did it clearly establish or outline the steps to ensuring that the plan is inclusive. And lastly, and I think the most important part of this paper, was the policy implications. So I think the first thing was rethinking the planning process itself, because it's not inclusive and it's barely participatory, and ensuring that all vulnerable communities are represented. Then secondly, was improving the disaster management plan itself, given its lack of inclusion. Thirdly was redefining the extent of involvement of third parties like NGOs and private organizations. And yeah, so I think that, and lastly, that brings me to incentivizing private involvement. So the plan mentions a lot of third parties, but at no point does it explain the roles or the responsibilities of these parties. And research does show that that public-private partnerships, as well as the involvement of NGOs, does improve community resilience. So that brings me to the last policy implication, which is how we could incentivize private involvement in the future to improve the resilience of informal workers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think this was a fantastic set of presentations and a great sampling of the kinds of topics that students are working on across the social sciences, the humanities, and the sciences. And I'm very glad to see the level of thought and preparation that went into it. So really good job, and a round of virtual applause for all of you guys. I hope this was useful and interesting to everybody in the audience too. And we now come to the final section of this evening, the graduation ceremony. After seeing the kind of work that they've gone through, I think it is incredibly important that we take a moment to congratulate all of them and celebrate their success. I'm going to basically go over a set of slides with the names of the students who are graduating. And I request you all to either use the clap emoticon on Zoom to applaud for them, or to unmute yourself and applaud if you're feeling that. So without further ado, the graduating summer class of research scholars for 2020. Asta Bagri, the research paper Conflicts in the Use of Isotopic Signatures to Establish the Age of the Solar System, with mentor Danielle from Brown University. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Agam Mohan Singh, Bhatia, with the research paper Effects of Urban Topography and Traffic Emissions on UFP Concentrations, Reactive Nitrogen Species, and Ozone in the Greater Los Angeles Area. Once again, with mentor Danielle from Brown University, we've got an all-star mentor who worked with 2 students. Congratulations. Arhan Wadhwani, working on factors affecting CO2 emissions of a car with the incredible Santiago Romero Brufau, an assistant professor at the Mayo Clinic. Apni Vats, on rethinking urban disaster management, a case study of Mumbai's inclusion of informal workers, with mentor Haley Tran from the University of Oxford, who is also on this call. Congratulations to both Avni and Haley. Fangjong Zing, with the paper Using the CVD Method to Prepare Graphene on a Variety of Substrates, with mentor Min Wu from Harvard University. Congratulations. We have Misha Gupta, with the Challenges of High School, an experimental paper on enhancing student productivity using commitment devices, with mentor Han from Columbia University. Congratulations. We have Niharika Chittaranjan, Can Wildlife Conservation Promote Rural Development in India, with some guy as a mentor. Congratulations, Niharika. And we have Pham Tao Lin on the paper, How Do Hong Kong Protests Inspire a New Kind of Social Movement, with mentor Aurelia Jonathan from Harvard University. Congratulations. That brings me to the end of the graduating students of this cohort. Congratulations to everyone on a phenomenal 10 weeks in the program and continuing through it with outstanding results. So now that you've done the Lumiere Research Scholar Program, what's next? Congratulations, first of all, and take a moment to breathe and celebrate this wild journey that all of you went on. There's 3 big things on the horizon, though, because we just don't want to let you go. The first is that you are all now officially Lumiere Research Scholar Program alumni. This gives you access to the amazing alumni network where you get to meet not just your cohort of students, but past and present cohorts of research scholars who've gone on to do incredible things. And you get access to alumni events, such as sessions with colleges, with experts, with professors, things that you can look out for in your email inbox. The second is that we would love for you guys to apply to the Lumiere Student Advisory Board, which is a board of current and past students who have gone through the program. And what this advisory board does is that it gives us a perspective from your point of view, tells us what it's like to be a student in the program, what works well, what doesn't work well, and what we can change. And you play a really important role in co-creating the program with us and taking on a position of responsibility within the program. So we'd love to see some of you apply to the Student Advisory Board, and we'll send you an email about that as well. And finally, if you've done your research and you're not tired of it yet, and even if you are, after a week or 2, if you start missing it again, we would love to have you back. We've got beyond the Research Scholar Program, we've got an advanced publication course where students who've got research papers already, either students who've gone through the program or others, can apply with a copy of the paper that they have written and work with a mentor to refine the paper, improve it, and work on getting it through the publication process at high school journals. So these are all various opportunities for you to continue engaging with Lumiere. The fact that you're done being a research scholar doesn't mean that you're done with the organization. And we definitely plan to keep speaking to you and keep hearing about your achievements in the future. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and congratulations everyone once again for making it through the program. I just want to take a quick second to reflect on what you've done, which is that over the last 10 weeks, all of you students have done something that the vast, vast majority of high schoolers in the world, the vast, vast majority of high schoolers in your own schools haven't done. You've taken on an incredibly ambitious, independent, and difficult project, and you've tackled it head on. You've managed your time, you've worked at it, you've chipped away at it, you've hit roadblocks, you've been frustrated, you have improved and edited and come up with a final product that you're proud of. That's really something. But you've also dived into academic research. You've really stood on the shoulders of giants. You've engaged with the biggest names in research in your fields, thought about their research, figured out what the contributions those researchers have made and where they've fallen short. And by standing on the shoulders of these giants, you've seen further. You've engaged with the world and made an original contribution to knowledge. That is amazing for any human being to have done in their time on this planet. And you guys have done this at such a young age. I can't wait to see where you progress as you keep going in your fields and keep working on the creation of new knowledge. And most importantly, you've spent 10 weeks with an incredible mentor, someone who shaped the way you think, who's exposed you to new opportunities, who's helped you gain access to incredible resources and incredible techniques that you'd never seen before. That's the sort of experience that is life-changing. And we are so grateful that you came along with us on this journey. Congratulations once again, and welcome to the Lumiere family. Congratulations. Thank you, everyone. You're free to go.